Hello everybody, this is Fernando for the latest aliens and UFOs video. Alright, let's go ahead and let's do another entry here, once again based on a new suggestion. Actually, this was something that was suggested in the past. I remember reading information about it and especially seeing the very distinct set of aliens that we featured within this story, some images that were linked to them, but for whatever reason I just left it on the side and I never really returned back to it. But it's now been suggested again, so I'm going to go ahead and I'll feature it here. It has to do with a very unique but almost like the nicest form of abduction that I've read yet. You know how there's abductions out there reported where people are just absolutely terrified? Here in this case, this was almost like a doctor's visit. It was something along those lines. But it has to do with this. You're looking at a representation of it now. It has a very unique name. It's known as the Emilcin Abduction. So let's go ahead and let's talk about that here. I'll mention why it's called that in a moment, and then I'll highlight how this again is one of the nicest abductions that have ever really happened. So here's all the information associated with it. So apparently this all started back in May of 1978, specifically in an area called Emilcin, Poland. So again, that's why it's called the Emilcin Abduction, because where this situation occurred was basically right there. So as that story was happening, there was a gentleman by the name of Jan Wolski. He was someone that was there, presumably living in that area. He was just driving, in other words, a cart. This was a cart that had a horse on it, so it was being pulled by the horse itself. And this would have been sometime on May 10th of 1978 specifically. As he was doing so, I got the impression that he was just doing some farm work. All of a sudden, there were these two, as were described, short, green-faced humanoid entities that suddenly jumped into his cart. It almost like the pranksters, like the way you would think that somebody would just jump into a car and then inadvertently they're there and clearly they're surprising the person. That's the impression that I got here. Now here's how they were described. And this is again why there was a very distinct set of images associated with them. Again, they're green-faced, they're humanoid, they're about maybe 5 feet tall or shorter, and they were described as having a very unique set of slanted eyes and very prominent cheekbones. This was again the description associated from that gentleman, Jan Wolski. The reason why it's mentioned that it's green-faced rather than green-bodied is because apparently the rest of the actual body itself of these two aliens or these two entities was completely covered up. So pretty much the only skin, if you could even call it that he could see was stuff associated with the face itself. And so at first, he didn't really think much of it. Bizarrely, you would think that it would be something where somebody would run off as quickly as possible in sheer terror, but I kind of understood his perspective. He actually mistook them for foreigners, like people that were not native there to the Poland area, let alone the Emilcin area. And this is because they started to speak to him. I don't know if this was in an aggressive or maybe a nice language, but I imagine it was in a nice manner. Otherwise, he would have, again, taken things in another direction. But they started to speak to him in a language that he did not understand. So his immediate thought and his natural inclination, which again, I think this is something that would make sense, is these are two sets of people that are just from another land that are here for whatever reason, and now they're inside his cart. The last things that most people would think is they're dealing with entities from a whole different galaxy. So he's trying to, again, apply logic to what's happening to him. In either case, though, he decided to take them, I guess, to a short little trip, driving them alongside his cart, and the way he described it, they reached a clearing, and that's where this clearing contained a very notable object. I got the impression, too, that while he was driving the cart, maybe they in turn were also directing him straight towards it. At that clearing was a UFO, but it was a very unique UFO. It was described as follows. It was about maybe 14 to 16 feet in total height, and then also apparently about 16 feet long. If I'm not mistaken, it was purely white, and it was described as being as long as a bus. So again, gives you an idea of the length associated with it, maybe even the massive size linked to it as well. And then he noticed that it was hovering right there in the air. It was also maybe about 10 to 16 feet off the ground, and it didn't have anything else that really stood out associated with it. Like there was nothing else that you would think involving a normal aircraft, like windows or doorways or anything else like areas that are combined or joining together, nails, the usual stuff that you would inspect whenever it comes to any type of aircraft. No, in fact, it was very notable for having very little amounts of items other than maybe just a few objects here or there. But otherwise, he noticed that there were 4 objects on the actual craft itself that had to look of something involving a blackish material, and he noticed that there was a humming sound that was coming from that UFO as well. And again, this was purely solid white, something again that is very unique when it comes to the alien and UFOs world. All the other times that I've spoken, they've either been bright lights or they've been something along the lines of a metallic color. Here it's something that is purely solid white. But as this was happening, he noticed that there was a platform that suddenly started to descend to the ground. It did so in the form of an elevator. In other words, straight up and down. And that's when these 2 aliens or entities somehow were able to gesture him to go on board. Maybe he was being influenced, or maybe he in turn was fascinated by what was occurring. The impression I got of Jan Wolski was this was just an ordinary man, probably living some kind of farmer's life. To him, he would not be making this stuff up. Nothing really much would excite him or surprise him. He's just somebody that's just living his everyday normal life, and he in turn is suddenly experiencing this for the first time. So maybe he decided, why not? Like this was something else that just didn't really catch him off guard, in other words. But there he was going into the actual aircraft or flying object itself. He was taken to an area there that he later described as having no lights, no windows. In fact, the only light really that was coming from afterwards was from the doorway, if you could even call it that. Apparently it was left open, and so that was essentially the only light that was coming in. But there he was around an area that had about 8 or 10 benches. I'm guessing this was maybe in a circular fashion or something else. But either way, though, he noted that it was about the size of a person. So somebody could easily either sit or lay down on that bench. And that's essentially what the aliens had him do. Again, they were able to gesture him to take off his clothes, to undress right in front of him. And he didn't seem to have any bad response to it. He didn't do any objections or again run out of there or fight back, anything along those lines. And so he undressed in front of them. He also noted that there was these 2 rooks. Apparently they're a form of bird, and they were there on top of some kind of doorway as well, but they weren't moving. They were completely just immobilized, but he noted that they were in turn moving a little bit with their legs and wings, meaning they were alive, they just couldn't move from their specific location. And then that's when he was naked, they were in turn examining him with some strange tool. He described it as being something along the line of 2 dishes that are put together or 2 saucers that are put together. And again, the impression I got is that this is almost like the nicest abduction I've ever heard. Almost again like the doctor's visit, because they just basically examined him right then and there, and then he was done. He was actually done, and they told him to redress, or motioned to him to redress. And then whenever he was about to leave, he noted that they in turn started to eat something. He described it as it being more along the lines of some form of icicles, and they actually offered it to him. Can you imagine that? Can you imagine if he actually would have eaten those icicles? What food that would have been from a whole other world or galaxy, or if he would have been able to keep it. I mean, talk about the greatest evidence of all time when it comes to that type of material from an alien world in his possession. But alas, he did not. He refused to have those icicles, or refused to eat them as well. And then he was taken outside, and then that was it. As the aircraft, I guess, was leaving or about to leave, or as he was leaving at that point, he noted that there was an interior look to it, and it was described more on lines of blackish or grayish, but that could be interpreted because of the darkness as well, because again, the only light was coming from the doorway. If you wonder what happened next, there really wasn't much. Again, this gentleman, this Wolski, I get the impression again that he just takes things in measured steps. Nothing really surprises him. His next step was natural. It was this. He went home to his family and he notified them exactly what had occurred, and then he was wanting them to come see this UFO, everything that he saw out there. So he brought his sons, he brought his neighbors as well. They went to investigate that location. Unfortunately, the aircraft was gone. It was completely gone at that point. The only evidence of it, if you could even call it that, was the grass where this UFO was hovering. It seemed to have some signs of usage. Maybe whatever it was that was elevating it or causing it to hover was essentially causing the grass underneath it to have those signs. But that was it. The way it was described was the grass was trodden down, covered with dew and paths coming in all directions. One of the sons, though, did claim that there were some footprints left behind by two of those two aliens themselves, or maybe there were some of the other ones as well, too, from the ship, if they were even there as well. But unfortunately, no one really examined them. No one took pictures. No one made casts associated with them. Again, talk about fantastic evidence. The only evidence really, again, was that grass, and then that was it. And as we all know, grass eventually dies out. So otherwise, that was pretty much it. It was now down to the word associated from the gentleman, Jan Wolski, and then that was it. He ended up giving an interview, it looks like, to two people, one by the name of Henryk Pomorsky and another one by the name of Christina Amzik, and this was back in July of 1978, maybe about 2 months or so after the actual incident that occurred to him, but nothing else really happened to it. Nothing happened to him afterwards. This was just a one-off alien abduction, if you could even call it that, associated with how peaceful it was, and then that was it. He just lived out, it seemed like, the rest of his life as is. There were some other portrayals that were done. The interview that he gave as well ended up coming forward. I think it was published shortly afterward. I'm sorry, much later on. My apologies. It was released because it was otherwise kept in private. And that's how much of the story eventually leaked out with regards to the Emilcin abduction. But otherwise, the only other thing to notate is this. Once that interview came out and that notoriety started to spread about this abduction, somebody decided to create the Emilcin UFO Memorial, which you're looking at here. And it's a pretty unique looking memorial. It's one of the few times I've heard of a memorial being placed for an alien abduction. And so people go there to this day every single year on the anniversary. Again, it'll be May 10th of every year, and they go straight to that memorial because that's supposed to be the spot of the actual alien abduction. How cool is that? You know how much I love exact locations. Imagine the idea of being able to go out there and then go to the exact spot, like down to the foot, that's where the alien abduction occurred, where that UFO was, and where these two aliens, these two short, very distinct green-faced aliens were. People claim that when they go to that location, that they in turn feel some kind of weird energy. Some people have stated, I can feel the energy, and others state something unexplainable is going on. So maybe, who knows, there's after effects associated with this encounter, and they're still there too this very day. But that's pretty much it. That's all the information associated with the Emilcin abduction. What do you guys think about that? Peaceful abduction, almost like a doctor's examination. What was it? What were these two aliens wanting? Where did they come from? What happened to them afterward? The only other thing really to notate is there was a boy who stated he saw a similar craft hovering around that area. I think it was one of the other nights afterward. But either way, though, he saw that it vanished, and then that was it. But if anybody has any more info, anything else I might have missed, then please post those comments below. Any of you had a chance to visit maybe that location there in Emilcin, Poland, go to the actual memorial, let me know. If I was nearby that area, I would gladly do so. And then afterward, by the way, Jan Wolski, he just ended up passing away on January of 1990 at the old age of 82. So if you wonder what happened to him, that was pretty much it. All right, everybody. Thanks again as always. Take care.